And welcome, Hoosier fans, to another victorious episode of the Assembly Call. As today, your Indiana Hoosiers defeat the Northwestern Wildcats 66-46 in a game that featured a thoroughly dominant second-half performance by Indiana, especially on the defensive end of the court. And your Indiana Hoosiers have now won 3 games in a row. They are 4-2 in the Big Ten Conference and 11-7 overall. And really, for the first time all season, it feels like the Hoosiers have some legit momentum, and we are excited to break this game down for you. I'm your host, Jared Morris. I'm here with Andy Bottoms. Ryan Phillips has NFL duty this afternoon, so he sent us a text message, said this is obviously the most impressive performance of the season, but is disappointed he won't be able to join us on the show. But wow, what a victory for the Hoosiers, keyed by, as I said, some of the best defense that we've seen from an Indiana team in a long, long time. All right, let's start tonight's show as we start every show, and that is with our Hoosier Proud banner moment. And, I wrote down what I'm about to talk about for the banner moment, when it happened, and nothing happened after that to make me change my mind. But as I was kind of reflecting right before the game, I wanted something for defense because defense was such the story of this game, and yet I don't know that any specific moment stood out on defense. It was just the relentless focus and pressure and connectedness and togetherness that Indiana had on defense. So we're definitely going to break down the impressive defensive performance. But for the individual moment that stuck out to me, the banner moment, I want to take you back to the 13:41 mark of the second half. And at this point in the game, Indiana was up 37-26. And it certainly felt like the Hoosiers had taken control of the game. And this has been a point at times this season when Indiana's gotten up, but they haven't quite had the offensive punch, the firepower, the consistency to kind of take it to that next level and extend a 10-point lead to 13 and keep it going. Well, Robert Johnson missed a three-pointer from the wing. And Indiana, as it has done so often this season, hustled for an offensive rebound. I think Juwan Morgan hit it, and then Colin Hartman tapped it back out, and Zach McRoberts ended up coming down with the ball around the half-court line. And he kicked it out to Robert Johnson, who stepped right up, again, right after missing a three, stepped up with what I wrote down was it was almost like conspicuous confidence. Like he just looked so confident stepping into that shot, drained it. It gave Indiana a 40-26 lead. And in hindsight, it really was the dagger. I mean, it felt like it at the time because it pushed that lead out to 14. I'm not sure Northwestern ever got closer than that. That was part of that big 27-2 run that Indiana had in the second half, and it was actually the second really big three-pointer Robert Johnson had hit to that point in the second half, and I'll talk about the other one in the meaningful moment that you might have missed. But Robert stepping up and shooting with that kind of confidence in one of those, unguarded catch and shoot situations that we talked about on Assembly Call Radio this week. It's so important for this team to reach its potential here going down the stretch for guys like Robert Johnson to step up and be able to start making shots consistently. And I think at that point in the game, he was 5 of 9 from downtown. He would subsequently miss a couple of them, but Robert finishes with a team lead of 17 points. He was 5-11 from downtown, and it was nice to see him, again, seconds after missing one, step up with such confidence despite the struggles that he's had and drain that shot, and really what put a lot of distance between Indiana and Northwestern, and the Hoosiers never looked back from that point on in the second half. Our banner moment, as always, brought to you by our friends at Hoosier Proud, an Indiana-based t-shirt and apparel company that is by Hoosiers for Hoosiers. And there are several reasons why you should be checking out HoosierProud.com. The first, of course, is their splendid designs. They obviously have our Assembly Call logo t-shirts, and so if you want to support the show and wear an Assembly Call shirt, you can go to HoosierProud.com and get those. They also have officially licensed IU gear, so basketball-themed shirts, football-themed shirts, soccer-themed shirts, they're all there. And they also just have some really cool designs inspired by unique elements of the Hoosier State. So go to HoosierProud.com, check out all of those different designs. And another great reason to shop there is you're supporting Indiana-based charities when you do, because our friends at Hoosier Proud are committed to those philanthropic efforts and to supporting Indiana-based charities. So a portion of the revenue from t-shirt sales goes to support Indiana-based charities. And the third reason to go to HoosierProud.com, obviously, they're very generous for you, for our audience here at the Assembly Call. When you use the promo code ASSEMBLY, ASSEMBLY, they will give you 15% off your entire order. So again, check them out at HoosierProud.com. Use the promo code ASSEMBLY for 15% off your entire order. All right, time to move the ball, find the open man, and get some opening thoughts from the rest of our team, which today consists of one man, and that is Andy Bottoms. And it is time for his Bottoms line, brought to us by IUStore.shop.
Well, it was the first half was pretty ugly. Although I will say that as a fan of a football team now quarterbacked by Nick Foles, I am willing to embrace winning ugly. But I tell you that the beginning of that second half was absolutely fantastic. I mean, the ball movement, which was really present throughout the game. And I think IU had 17 assists on 23 made field goals, and it really kind of turned. That 25-2 run started right around the 17-minute mark, and when Colin Hartman came in the game for Justin Smith, and Justin had scored to the half for IU, but I think had a couple lapses on defense, and Archie took him out. And that group that was really kind of all veteran guys, the group of Hartman, Johnson, McRoberts, Morgan, and Newkirk, all juniors and seniors, they were a plus 17 during the stretch before they got subbed out, and not quite about 6.5 minutes. And those guys just all played really well. Everybody made contributions, whether it was Newkirk making a lot of smart decisions in that stretch, Robert and Juwan really doing a lot of the scoring, and Colin with some nice passing as well. So just a really, to think that what the first half was turned into something that we'd all say was a beautiful game was not something many people would have anticipated that were watching the first half. But just another really solid performance. Again, you saw guys step up. When Morgan goes out with foul trouble, McRoberts goes out with foul trouble. The bench played another big role, as they have lately, and it's kind of been a revolving door of guys. But a lot of positive things to say about really pretty much anybody who got in the game today, and the defense, as you said, was spectacular. I mean, Northwestern ends up with 46, and that's with scoring 12 in the last 3 minutes and change. So a lot of garbage time stuff there, and IU really made them uncomfortable. I think even to a point when I think Clark Kellogg or somebody mentioned it on the game, and that's just something that we've talked about so often, and to actually see it happen was pretty fun.
Oh, it was, and that's the thing. The first half, when you think about it, it was ugly. I mean, that was some just absolutely ugly basketball, really, on both sides. And yet, in hindsight, there was some beauty to it from an Indiana perspective, because when you think about the fact that, 3 of your starters play 10 of a possible 60 minutes, and especially when one of those guys is a guy as important as Juwan Morgan, Justin Smith, and Zach McRoberts being the other ones, not just to stay afloat, but to have a 5-point lead at halftime. I mean, that is a testament, obviously, to how well prepared these guys were, to the coaching of Archie Miller, and just to some of the tough, gritty plays. Freddie McSwain made a couple of nice baskets in the first half. Devonte Green, I thought, despite really struggling against the zone offensively, had one of his better defensive games in the first half. And it was all that little stuff adding up. And I think that's why this game is so impressive, because we saw in the Minnesota win and the Penn State win, Indiana really needing to win ugly. Shots aren't falling, and you're having to grind out every bucket, it felt like. And that's really what the first half felt like, and so it showed, Indiana could grind out a lead against Northwestern. And then the second half starts, and they start getting the ball to Juwan, and Justin Smith starts working that short corner, and Robert Johnson starts making 3-pointers. And finally, you see kind of a beautiful stretch of offense that has been so few and far between for this Indiana team. But, you kind of saw the potential. And so I think you saw the gritty, tough Archie ball in the first half to keep the lead. And then you saw what this team is capable of when they're clicking on all cylinders in the second half. Now, obviously, that's not going to happen, all the time. And you're going to face opponents who, unlike what Northwestern was able to do today, that are going to be able to make some buckets and not allow you to go on that kind of a run. But, man, it was impressive to see kind of both sides of it, the gritty toughness in the first half and that same toughness in the second half, but then actually with some offensive firepower. It kind of opens your mind a little bit more to what this team might be capable of here down the stretch.
Well, and I mean, the mindset that they had defensively and the way that they played, once IU started hitting shots, I mean, Northwestern was just completely demoralized at that point, because they really had not been able to score, but basically because IU hadn't played well in the first half, in large part, I think, because Morgan was out. I think that they got demoralized pretty quickly, because I think it was like, well, if you're going to play a team defending like this, how are you going to come back in this game? And they really just started, it was Bryant McIntosh trying to go, one-on-one, and everybody else just looked pretty uncomfortable and reluctant to do anything. So, and I think for IU to sustain that, I mean, we've talked about being able to play well for longer stretches and have, put together complete games and things like that. Defensively, I think without a doubt, this was the most complete game of the season. There was really, if you want to say there was a lapse at the end of the game, that's fine. But really, otherwise, there were really no defensive lapses in the game. And I think that's obviously encouraging. It was another game when, IU led for all but 20, or well, no, Northwestern only led for 20 seconds. I shouldn't say there was some time that the game was tied, but again, it was it was a really thorough defensive performance. And I think that's something that we've all waited for. And I think it was as impressive to me, not only that it started that way, but that didn't let up even when they started to make shots in the second half.
You're listening to the Assembly Call. I'm Jared Morris here with Andy Bottoms, breaking down Indiana's impressive 66-46 win over Northwestern. Let's talk a little bit more about the defense, because coming into the game, Archie Miller talked about how important it was, for the guards in a couple of ways. Obviously the focus was Bryant McIntosh. This is a guy coming off a 16 assist, 0 turnover game against Minnesota. Now, clearly, Minnesota season is going off the rails, so maybe it's not that impressive to be doing things against Minnesota anymore. But still, 16 points, 0 turnovers is a huge game, and we've seen Brian McIntosh play well against Indiana in the past. Well, he finishes today with just 7 points, 2 assists, and 3 turnovers. And Scotty Lindsey, their leading scorer, finishes with just 2 points. He was 1 of 15 from the field. Now, obviously, him just missing some shots he normally makes was a part of that. But as I saw you tweet out, Robert Johnson really played some good defense on him. And so I think, this is a game where the guards really deserve a hat tip. Robert Johnson and Josh Newkirk, the starters, who I thought really set a good tone and played really solid on both ends. And then also Al Durham and Devonte Green, who I thought both came in. And while their offensive contributions were a little bit up and down, Devonte especially, they both continued the strong defense. And there was a stretch in the second half, actually, where Al Durham was guarding Vic Law, who ended up as Northwestern's leading scorer with 9 points, and really played him well. And so I thought the guard defense, the ability to control dribble penetration, the ability, as you mentioned, to not allow them to be comfortable, I thought that really keyed the defense. And I thought it's what allowed Indiana to continue playing good defense, even when Juwan was out, and you had the middle being manned by Freddie McSwain and Clifton Moore, who, try their hardest, but they're going to give up, some opportunities just because they're not as consistent defensively. But being able to really pressure the guards kept Indiana's defense consistent all game.
Yeah, I mean, when you look across Law, Lindsey, and McIntosh, who are kind of their guard/wing players, they were a combined 7 of 34 for the game, I think. I mean, that I saw I'm sure the possession that I have in my head of Al guarding Vic Law is the same one that probably prompted you to say something about that. But I thought, it
was like 15 seconds of dribbling that Al stayed with him the whole time.
Yeah. And McRoberts really frustrated him. I mean, he was really getting kind of physical on some of the rebounds. Like, you could just tell he was really frustrated. The one he threw McRoberts to the ground. And I thought Zach did a really good job on him as well when he played on him. But I thought Robert in particular against Scotty Lindsey. Yeah. I mean, all 14 misses, I'm not going to chalk up to good defense. Some of that's just a guy, not making shots, but some of that is also a guy who was, maybe quicker to shoot in the moment he got an inch of space to be able to get the shot up. But I thought Robert did a really, really good job on him, was, truly made him uncomfortable, pushed him away from the basket, didn't get any shots off the dribble without a hand right in his face. And I mean, as you said, that can help ease some of the issues that this team's going to have, because it's got some decent shot blockers, but it doesn't have a lot of size if you get people driving to the rim. And I thought they did a really good job of keeping him in front. And again, as good a job sustained over a long period of time than we've seen over the course of the season from a guarding the dribble standpoint.
Yeah, and Robert Johnson led the team in rebounding with 6. Newkirk had 3, Al Durham had 3, and Devonte Green, again, despite his struggles offensively, he had 5 steals. And a couple of them, he had a stretch earlier where he had 2 steals in a row that was, kind of a really nice stretch for Indiana. And so again, in the second half, he didn't play very well, and Archie took him out after a couple of mistakes. But I don't want that to overshadow what I thought in the first half was probably the best defense that he has played as a Hoosier. That was really impressive. And the other thing about this game, Andy, and we'll obviously break down some more of the individual performances, but you kind of alluded to it earlier. I mean, you go up and down the roster and, you think about the Minnesota game and it's like, all right, Juwan, Justin, and Robert played well. And then everybody else was like a black hole, and then the Penn State game, you had Newkirk play well, but Justin Smith doesn't really show up. Today, I mean, you look up and down, pretty much everybody who played made a positive contribution. And, so outside of Devonte's struggles offensively, there's not a whole lot of nitpicking. Like, this was just a really solid game with guys eliminating some of the dumb mistakes, no real bad stretches. And that in and of itself really feels like progress for a team that has been such a roller coaster. And, who knows? I'm sure part of that is just, getting comfortable with each other, especially with Deron Davis out, now playing with some of these new lineups, longer stretches, getting more comfortable with Archie's system, guys getting more comfortable in their roles. This team seems like it's starting to settle into, something that can become a much more consistent unit.
Yeah, I mean, we joked about, we may never see all the guys on this roster hitting at the same time, but today I think does show the depth and the balance. You've got 8 guys who scored at least 4 points. You've got 8 guys who grabbed at least 3 rebounds, 6 guys with at least 2 assists, and 5 guys with at least 1 steal. I mean, that, as you said, is when you really look down the roster, everybody made a contribution, and to really, kind of hold things together in that first half without Juwan, because then in the beginning of the second half, he showed just how important he was for them to be able to run the offense through him, particularly against his own and some of the nice passes and finishes that he had in there. But yeah, I mean, we thought initially that depth would at least be a strength of this team and some of the experience. And there have been times that I think we've all wondered whether that's true. But I mean, I cited a lineup that was full of juniors and seniors that blew the game wide open. And we've got, 9 to 10 guys that we would say played really well and made positive contributions. So, the bench scoring has been something that really has, these last couple of games has really stood out. And I think that's going to continue to be important. As IU can't seem to keep itself out of foul trouble in some ways, but that was really a big edge. Northwestern ended up with 12 bench points, but I think so many of those came during that stretch at the end of the game. Maybe all of them came during that stretch at the end of the game. So, I think for quite a while it was probably 15. It was 15-0 bench points at halftime. I think it was probably 17 or 19-0 late into the game, where that's just a huge edge that they have. And I think if you looked at the rebounding and assist numbers off the bench, you'd probably see something similar.
Yep. All right. Coming up on the assembly call, I will point out tonight's meaningful moments that you might have missed, and we will go inside the numbers. That is next here on the assembly call. Stick with us. You're listening to the Assembly Call IU postgame show. I'm Jared Morris here with Andy Bottoms, breaking down Indiana's 20-point demolition of the Northwestern Wildcats. And it is time for today's meaningful moment that you might have missed. And there are a couple of them that I want to point out. Once again, I thought Indiana really did a nice job at the end of the first half and the beginning of the second half. Those had been trouble spots for the Hoosiers, and they really seem to have fixed whatever may have been ailing them. In the first half, if you go back, it was 18-15, and Indiana had built, I think, like a 13-3 or a 15-3 lead, and Northwestern kind of chipped away, and it looked like they would get themselves right back into it, and it would be kind of a back and forth game that it would settle into that. Well, I thought it was really big then when it was 18-15 and the Hoosiers were really struggling offensively. Robert Johnson and Colin Hartman nailed back-to-back three-pointers, and that pushed it right out to 24-15. Northwestern would end up chipping away a little bit, but it was still a 5-point lead going into halftime. And I just thought those 2 threes by those guys really helped when the offense was struggling and gave Indiana kind of the lead it deserved at that point. Because it could be, I think, a little bit demoralizing if you play defense that good, that well, and you don't even have a lead. And it looked like Northwestern was about to come, all the way back and tie it or take the lead themselves. And so I thought those 2 threes to reassert Indiana's control of the game by seniors were really important. And I thought Robert Johnson hit another 3 in the second half. And we certainly should talk about the stretch at the beginning of the second half where Indiana, fixed its zone offense problems, by getting the ball inside to Juwan Morgan, having Justin Smith work the short corner. They did that on 3 out of the first 4 possessions, and it worked beautifully. Indiana got a good look at the basket every time, and that was impressive. But I thought there was another 3 by Robert Johnson that was really important. Scotty Lindsey, the only bucket he made was that dunk that he had along the baseline. It was a big dunk. You saw their bench get into it. Chris Collins is kind of getting into it, clapping, trying to implore the guys to play good defense. And again, you kind of felt, all right, Northwestern's going to settle in here. This is going to be a back and forth game, starting to build some momentum. We go right down, and Robert stepped up and drained a 3 to put Indiana back up 7. Again, it was an assist from McRoberts, as was the play I mentioned during the banner moment. And those kind of shots have been missing at times. And so I think for Robert, to make that 3 in the first half when the offense is struggling, and then to make another one when Northwestern is starting to feel momentum, and then to make another one when you're up 11 to push it to 14 and essentially slam the door, those are the shots that you want seniors to make. And so I think all those shots were really, really important for Indiana. And, and they show what 3-point shooting can do for this team, because this is not going to be a team that's going to be driven by its 3-point shooting, and they need to focus on getting the ball inside. And they did a better job of that in the second half. But still, I don't think it's a coincidence that Indiana had this great performance and they made 8 3-pointers, which is a good number for them. They shot 34.8% from downtown, which is certainly better than what they've shot this season. And a lot of them were important threes at big times for the Hoosiers. What other stretches really stood out to you? What other moments really stood out to you, Andy?
The Hartman 3 was an interesting one because I just looked back while you were talking. He hit a big one from right about the same spot in the Penn State game at roughly a similar point in the game. That was where he got the 4-point play where Penn State had taken the lead after a run, and his 3 from that spot in the corner really stemmed the tide. So it was about 2 minutes away from in game time when it happened in the game today. So kind of interesting that those were a couple of big shots from him. Some of it to me was just the relentlessness in the second half, even when things really started to go well, where you had guys just really, Justin Smith with really working hard on a tip in up, 23 and yep. Was super active on the glass in that play. The
one play where Juwan Morgan ran the floor and just beat everybody on Northwestern back, and Robert found him. And yeah. I think that was when it was a 17-2 run at that point.
Yeah, there was that. There was the kind of quick sequence of passes from Robert to Hartman to Juwan for where he made the basket and got fouled. Yep. Right at the kind of led into the under 12 timeout. I mean, that was just really good ball movement. And there were a couple plays where in that same stretch where Josh Newkirk really made some smart plays. I think it was Jeremy Price. There was one of them where he didn't dribble and penetrate too far where he cut off his angle for the pass, and so he stopped at kind of at the elbow and was able to feed a nice pass into Juwan Morgan for a basket there as well. I thought he did some nice shot fakes and things like that where he didn't take bad shots. He wasn't out of control, and really made some solid passes during that stretch as well. So he didn't score as many points during that. I think he had a 3 kind of as the capper on that run, but I don't think he scored too much other than a couple free throws in that big run to start the half. But I thought he made some really smart plays during that stretch as well.
Yeah, Newkirk had a really kind of understated solid game today. Again, 12 points, a couple of assists. He had 3 rebounds. He was 2 of 3 from downtown, so he was the most efficient of Indiana's 3-point shooters. And he spent a long time guarding Bryant McIntosh today. And so I thought this was the kind of game that you need from Josh Newkirk. Just solid. Every now and then he explodes for a spectacular game, and every now and then he completely falls off the face of the earth. If Indiana can get this from Josh Newkirk, again, this is a big part of this team just becoming consistent, because like you said, I mean, he was really solid, and it was just making some of those just smart, solid plays, not over dribbling, keeping his angle. I thought that really contributed to it.
Yeah, I mean, that's, a couple games in a row that he's played really well. He was terrific in the Penn State game, was a big reason they were able to win that game with 16, and then to come back and follow that up with a good performance. I mean, a lot of the talk of the shooting and things like that, we all kind of talked about, it's a confidence thing, things like that. I think it's good to see a guy like him, stack a couple of good games, in succession, and hopefully that gives him some more confidence on the stretch. But I thought his decision-making lately has been really good. And I mean, if you look, he had no turnovers in 30 minutes against Penn State, and today had 2 in 30 minutes. So, for Josh Newkirk to play 60 minutes of basketball and have 2 turnovers and score 28 points, I think is, maybe more than what's reasonable to expect, but certainly a good sign for him going forward.
Yeah, I'll take it. I think we all will. Yeah. You're listening to the Assembly Call. I'm Jared Morris here with Andy Bottoms, breaking down Indiana's most impressive wire-to-wire performance of the season, a 66-46 victory over Northwestern. Andy, it's time to go inside the numbers. And one number that really jumps out to me, and this is more of an individual number, but you look at the plus-minus today, Juwan Morgan was plus 21. And he did that in only 16 minutes. And I don't think it's a coincidence that Indiana won this game by 20 points. I think at the end of the season, when you look at the game log for Juwan Morgan, this is not going to be a game that stands out. He only scores 8 points. He only grabs 5 rebounds. This is a guy who's been getting a double-double or threatening, for a double-double almost every single game. And obviously a big reason for that is he picks up those 2 fouls really early within the first 2 minutes and sits for the rest of the half. And I continue to not be a fan of that strategy, but Archie did it today with Justin, Juwan, and Zach McRoberts. And It didn't bite him in the rump today because obviously Indiana, kept the 5-point lead at halftime. But who knows? Maybe Indiana's up by 15 or 20 if those guys play more. And Juwan played the second half without fouling, so he's a guy that I think you can trust to play without fouling. So anyway, I don't want to rant too much about that because Indiana did win by 20. But again, Juwan only plays 16 minutes and he's plus 20. And so I think despite the numbers not being overwhelming, this, outside of the Notre Dame game, perhaps no other game has highlighted just how important he is, because you saw how the offense really stagnated without him. And then he comes in at the start of the second half and the offense just looks like gold again. All of a sudden we know what we're doing against the zone. We're getting the shots that we want. There's so much attention on him, and he's so good at making that decision now. You think back to the start of the season when sometimes he would hesitate a little bit when he would get the ball. I feel like he's really making the decision quicker, whether he's going to attack and get his shot or whether he's going to pass. And CBS even isolated that one play where he got the ball inside, and you could see where they paused it, that his head had turned and he could see Justin Smith out of the corner of his eye and made a little tap pass to Justin Smith almost before he landed on the ground, and Justin scored. And so it really highlighted all the different elements that Juwan brings to this team, when he was off the floor and when he was on the floor. And so the fact that Indiana's margin of victory was very similar to Juwan's plus minus, no surprise at all for a guy who just continues to prove that he's one of the most valuable players in the Big Ten.
Yeah, I actually, when I was charting the lineups during the game, I actually had him at plus 25, so it might be even better than you thought, depending on when you look at it. But yeah, I mean, I thought he made and he and Justin worked really well together as they did that. I mean, there was, a couple plays there in a row where he, anticipated where he was going to be and he was actually there. So those were, he just continues to impact the game in a lot of ways. I mean, in just a few minutes in the second half, I think he had, early on, he ended up scoring 8 points in the half, but I think most of those came early. I think he had 8 points, 4 rebounds, 2 assists in the half, maybe, 6-8 minutes into it.
Yeah.
So he just, yeah, I mean, for those of us who continue to say, he's maybe not getting enough discussion in, some of the all Big Ten or, even fringe Big Ten Player of the Year type things. I mean, your point was correct. I mean, that today, while it wasn't a great game for him statistically, highlighted just how important he was when you look at the, how fluid the second half was and how choppy the first half was.
Yeah, and by the way, the official IU box score has him at plus 30, so it just keeps getting better.
There were some weird things where like they didn't sub him out correctly, I think, in the thing. So I think that's why that one's a little bit higher. So I think my plus 25 is pretty good, but I wouldn't stake my life on it.
Yeah, I mean, the only guy who slowed him down today was his coach by taking him out in the first half, really. So I will say, though, he's got to be careful on those fouls. The second foul he picked up was a moving screen. Those little cheap fouls he can't pick up because he's really good at defending without fouling. So those kind of little fouls away from the basket, he's obviously got to be smarter because he's just so valuable to the team. Let's talk about some other numbers. A lot of them jump out. I think the turnover percentage differential, Indiana turns it over on 17.5% of their possessions, which is a solid number. They only had 11 turnovers total. No one had more than 2. Northwestern turns it over 17 times. That's a turnover percentage of 26.3. Sometimes you look at that and that could be a team just making unforced errors. And while Northwestern had a few of those, I thought Indiana's defensive pressure and relentlessness was a big reason why Northwestern turned it over so much. And that obviously was a major contributing factor to their low points per possession number. And then, Andy, the other number that jumps out, and we've been talking about this number a lot this season, but the assist rate. Indiana assisted on 74% of its made field goals. And Clark Kellogg even talked about this on the broadcast. But the Hoosiers had 17 assists on 23 made field goals. And this is a number that has been much better. You go back to the Fort Wayne game. One of the biggest things Archie talked about after the game wasn't the poor three-point defense. It was how Indiana's selfishness offensively led to poor defense. And really since then, I don't know, maybe the Wisconsin game wasn't as good, but the assist rate has been much, much better almost every game. And it was clearly a point of contention for their coach, and the guys really seem to have internalized it because the ball movement was good. I almost thought guys overpassed a little bit and passed up some good looks that you'd like to see him take, especially Colin and Robert a couple times. But overall, that was much better today as well.
Yeah, that was definitely one that stood out to me. I mean, just to kind of put the Northwestern turnovers into a little bit of context. I mean, after this game, KenPom's already updated. They're just outside the top 100 at 17.8%. So that obviously contains today's game. So they're, a top 100 team at taking care of the basketball. One of the things that they have typically done pretty well that you'd expect a team that has a veteran backcourt to do. So I do give IU a lot of credit for that. Yeah, the assist is one that really stood out to me. And we've talked both from an assist to turnover ratio as well as from a assist rate for IU. And, I think 7 and 9, only made 9 shots in the first half, but they assisted on 7 of them. And then the second half, I think it was 10 out of 14. And I would venture to say that during that stretch where where they really blew the game open, it was almost every one of them was a result of 1 to 2 really good passes that set things up. And I think some of that it has a little bit to do with it. They continue to, it feels like these last few games move a lot better without the ball. And I think those things have manifested themselves a little bit in just some more open looks, but guys are certainly willing to pass the basketball. And I think that's a good thing. And just 4 turnovers in the second half, I thought was really important as well. Free throw shooting, that was one of the positives the other night. If you want to look for a negative, 12 of 22 from the line was probably the biggest one from my standpoint. Juwan was 0 for 4. Justin Smith missed both his. Outside of Newkirk going 4 for 4. Not a lot to love there. So it certainly didn't bite him tonight, and they shot him well in a game against Penn State when it really mattered. But if there's anything to nitpick, I would guess that would be it. But really, aside from that, I thought, really unselfish play. The rebounding continued to be pretty good. That was
it was about even today, which is solid.
Yeah, I think when the game was really in doubt, and it's one of these where I wish you could kind of go back and pick a box score at a point in time and see what it was, because I do think a little bit of that tightened up a little bit. It certainly wasn't the same margin that we've seen, but again, being able to kind of hold their own on the glass and play really well there, being undersized against virtually anybody at this point, I think is a positive for them. And 9 steals out of those turnovers is big as well, because those are at least creating some live ball situations where you can get easy baskets, which this team's going to have to continue to try to get.
Yeah, you mentioned the KenPom numbers updated. Indiana now 89th in the country in KenPom with the latest victory. Still 2 spots below Iowa, which seems a little bit curious, but whatever. We'll let the sample size get a little bit larger for the computer. But importantly, Indiana 7 spots ahead of 6 and 11 Vanderbilt, who sits at 96th, which might be an interesting note for someone who is in attendance at the game today, sitting behind the Indiana bench. One more number I want to mention before we go to the next segment, Andy, is 2. And that's the 2 blocks for Clifton Moore. So, Clifton got 7 minutes. He played in the first half, so they weren't just garbage time minutes. And while he wasn't really able to get involved offensively, I thought both of those blocks showed pretty impressive defensive instincts. I think, if I remember correctly, both of them, he was playing help defense and came off his man, to block a shot of a guy who was driving to the basket. So both, really impressive block shots for Clifton Moore, kind of flashing a little bit of the potential. And so obviously, hopefully he'll be able to get some more minutes, be able to do a little bit more with them. And I think he showed when he got thoroughly lost on defense and Northwestern got its only easy 2-pointer of the game, and Derek Pardon got that dunk. He's still got a long way to go to be able to read what to do on a pick and roll and to kind of know where to be. But I thought the 2 block shots really flashed some of the potential that he has defensively.
Yeah, it was interesting. It was, I thought he did well in those help defense scenarios where he could really rotate over and block shots. But I thought in most other phases of defense, you can probably look at that and point to it as this is why we haven't seen him more, to date. And it's all part of the learning process. But I think as you look at reasons why, Archie is or isn't playing guys, I think our default answer at this point is they probably aren't doing what they need to do defensively. And I think that's probably reasonable for him. But it was, in some ways, I think the foul trouble and some of the things today were maybe a blessing in disguise that did get him a little bit of game action. And so I think as a shot blocking presence, he can certainly provide some value, and he may not get more minutes than he got today in a number of games, but at least for him to be able to step in. And again, we could, point down the roster. He made some positive contributions. He had a steal as well in his 7 minutes. So, good for him to just get some minutes in a Big Ten game, quite honestly. And at a point in the game when it actually mattered, I think is a positive thing. But yeah, you can see the flashes that are there, but you can also see, hey, here's why this guy might not be playing as much as people may want him to.
Yep. All right. Coming up on the Assembly Call, we continue our breakdown of Indiana's very enjoyable, very positive 66-46 victory over Northwestern. That's next on the Assembly Call. Stick with us. You are listening to the Assembly Call IU postgame show. Catch us live immediately following every IU basketball game and every Thursday night on our YouTube channel, youtube.com/assemblycall. You can also view all of our live broadcasts right on our homepage at assemblycall.com. I'm Jared Morris here with Andy Bottoms. We are breaking down Indiana's victory over Northwestern. And Andy, I wouldn't mind spending a little bit of extra time this show, kind of looking ahead to that Michigan State game that we have coming up Friday. Obviously, we can do pretty detailed preview of that one on Assembly Call Radio on Thursday. But before we do look ahead to that game, which I don't know, seems a little bit more winnable now than it did maybe 48 hours ago after Michigan State took a loss to Michigan by 10 points and Indiana played how they did today. I want to talk about just what other individuals jump out to you. The one guy that I want to talk about is Freddie McSwain, who didn't do a whole lot in the second half because he didn't really need to, because Juwan and Justin played a lot of minutes. But I thought the minutes that Freddie gave us in the first half were really important. With Juwan and Justin both on the bench, Freddie came in, he grabbed 5 rebounds for a good stretch there. Before that stretch where Robert Johnson and Colin Hartman hit the 2 3-pointers, Freddie was our leading scorer. And what I thought was really impressive about the 2 buckets that he made is that they are the kind of baskets that he's definitely not making last year, and probably earlier this season he's not making. And so maybe he got lucky on a couple of them, or maybe he's getting a little bit better, because on one he was on the move and Robert Johnson gave him a really tough pass to handle on a little fast break opportunity, and Freddie caught it, got the ball up and made it. And then on another one, in one of the only kind of positive possessions that we had against the zone, he got the ball at the elbow and took a couple dribbles to his left and was able to make a bucket. So you don't often see Freddie doing successful things offensively when he has to do more than just grab an offensive rebound and put it back. But I thought he showed, a little bit more competence there, on the move with the ball. Also had a couple of assists, didn't have any bad shots that he took, only had 1 turnover, and for the most part played pretty solid defense without any major breakdown. So in a half where Indiana needed its bench guys to step up and provide some solid minutes, Freddie was one of a few guys who was really able to do that in the first half.
Yeah, I mean, if you look at I think this is just his first half numbers. Yeah, he played 13 minutes in the first half, 4 points, 5 rebounds, 2 assists, and a steal. And I think, a lot of it with him is just activity level. He, just relentless on the glass, and that creates some scoring opportunities for other players. And this team, again, when they're not clicking offensively like they weren't in the first half, to be able to find a way to get some easy baskets was important. I thought he was a big part of that. Thought Al Durham played well off the bench in the first half as well. He ended up with 3 rebounds and was one of the, those 2 were the 2 leading rebounders in the first half, I believe. So, I thought he played well. Saw him make a couple shots today, which I think is a positive for him. He's really, hadn't scored a whole lot, and as he's kind of gone through the stretch. And I thought he, only played 5 minutes in the second half, but did make a shot in the lane. So I think good to see him, be able to see a couple go through the basket. Hopefully he can, start to build some of his confidence back up. But I thought both those guys really gave a good lift in the first half when McRoberts and Morgan went out, because they were really the first guys that Archie turned to, I would say.
Yeah, and we mentioned Colin Hartman a little bit. The buckets that he had in the first half, which were big. And this was kind of a Colin Hartman game. He had 6 points. He led Indiana in assists with 5 assists. Had a couple of offensive rebounds. Kind of getting back to doing Colin Hartman things today. Nothing spectacular, but made little plays when Indiana needed it. It kind of felt like when the team was in a bit of a lull offensively in the first half is when he looked for a shot a little bit more, almost sensing, hey, I'm a senior, I need to step up and do this. And as he, has done his whole career, just in the right place defensively, playing solid defense. And so another guy, among those guys off the bench who was really important in the first half.
Yeah, I agree with you. I think he really is picking his spots offensively. And I don't know, they talked about, I don't remember what it was on Twitter or on the broadcast. They talked about, everybody just kind of said he just seemed uncomfortable, just from a physical standpoint with the, shoulder brace and those kinds of things. But, really did a good job of playing through it. Again, that 3-pointer was a really big one in the first half. And then the assist really coming out. I think the combination of he and Juwan playing together during that, that 19-2 or that plus 17 stretch while that group was on the floor that I referenced earlier. I thought he did a really good job of, the assist that led to the assist in a number of cases. And I think the 2 of them, just a couple of really smart players out there on the floor, making some solid passes and being in the right spots, which is exactly what you'd expect from him and exactly what you'd expect from veteran guys. As much as we, felt like we weren't getting that not too long ago. I think that the kinds of leadership, we talked after the Wisconsin game, they stood outside the locker room and said kind of the same things that they've been saying. It felt like before, but I think, again, stepping up in those big spots as he did, and really has these last couple games in the first half, I think is a good way for him to show that leadership. And those guys have really responded since then.
Pop quiz for you, Andy. Where is Indiana ranked in Big Ten play and defensive efficiency?
Well, I actually know this because
did you look?
when you said, well, I did, but when you said the number 2 earlier about the Clifton Moore block shots, I thought that you were going to say that was IU's rank in conference play and defensive efficiency. So yeah, I do know. Yeah,
Indiana second in forcing turnovers. So I mean, the defense is just, I mean, it's night and day. The way that this team looks defensively. I wanted to ask you, if someone isn't really paying close attention, especially someone who hasn't paid close attention to the NCAA tournament, if you just watch the broadcast and listen to Clark Kellogg's, and I love Clark Kellogg, but it seems pretty clear that he's not much of a bracketologist, probably doesn't study this stuff too much, because he seemed to have a more flowery opinion of Indiana's NCAA tournament potential than maybe is realistic. Do you want to give us a quick reminder of where the Hoosiers stand, and what, if anything, does a win like this do? I mean, I'm looking at Ken Palm right now, and they rank games. There's an A tier and there's a B tier, and a lot of times a home game against an opponent that isn't that good isn't even a B. And even though Northwestern, has, for one of the few times in program history, they've got a decent reputation because of what they did last year. Their rankings have really fallen. I think they're 76th now in Ken Palm, and this isn't even an A or a B game. So does this game move the needle at all from an NCAA tournament perspective?
I mean, it probably depends a little bit on what Northwestern, turns out to be. At this point, IU just has to win games, quite frankly. I mean, that's what, anytime anybody asks me, is like, they just have to keep winning. They need to win a lot of games to make up for what they said, because the reality is, and they kind of showed it up, they flashed that. Yeah, I don't know that it was like a turn, just kind of a profile of the team, and it, said, good wins. It really only had the Notre Dame win, because if you think about who IU has beaten, that is really in the at-large picture, or would probably be in the tournament if it started today, that's really the only one. Minnesota is in free fall. They just got smoked at home by Purdue yesterday. Penn State, while I think we believe they're a decent team and kind of expected them to challenge for a bid, they really haven't done anything that's going to warrant that. Northwestern's kind of in the same boat. So when you step back and look at it that way, it's great to get the wins, but they've beaten one team that would probably be safely in the tournament. Even Notre Dame doesn't have a tremendous looking resume, but certainly a game they couldn't afford to lose if you look at it that way. And I think you start to get into some of these other games where you're going to have better chances at a win that might look a little bit better. But to put it in some level of context, there's a Bracketville, which is one of the other sites. I think he either won or now he came close to winning the bracket matrix last year. So he does a seed list that goes out pretty far, probably further than any of mine would. So IU is actually on it, so that's good.
Hey,
but it's 4, 8, 12, 16, 20, 24, 28. They're in like the among like the teams 29 to 32 out of the at-large picture. So I mean, they're in the picture, I guess.
So close to the first 4 bubble is what you're saying.
Close to the first 4. If the first 4, they're definitely within the first 4 times 8 out. So that's good.
If they make it the first 40, then we're clearly in the tournament.
So if they expand it from Dayton to various other towns in and around the Dayton area, then it's possible. I mean, who knows what can happen? This year has been pretty crazy, and nobody has, even the teams that everybody thinks are good continue to lose. So anything is possible. We're still probably too early to really think too much about it, but we'll see. It was, Clark feels like one of those guys where like everybody's in, and if this happens every year, that's like, oh, this team should be in, this team should be in, and they're like, well, the field isn't 96 teams yet, so you can't have it, like everybody can't be in. So we'll see, but he had some good things to say, I thought, about how things were progressing. So that was good to hear.
He also used the term trousers. I'm talking about someone's shorts. I think someone got a foul for grabbing someone's shorts, and he said, I think he grabbed his trousers. Just it's a great word. It's nice to see that word coming back. Reminded me of my grandma. You're listening to the Assembly Call IU postgame show. I'm Jared Morris here with Andy Bottoms, breaking down Indiana's 66-46 victory over Northwestern. Maybe the more important point, Andy, than, okay, where does this put Indiana and how important is this for the NCAA tournament profile is, for one of the first times all season, I thought in the second half, Indiana looked like an NCAA tournament team. You know what I mean? Like they played confidently. They were, playing effectively on both ends of the floor, playing with focus, playing with energy, playing with consistency. And they looked like a team that would belong in the NCAA tournament. And I think you have to do that, and then start doing it consistently and then rack up the victories before you can really talk about actually being in the NCAA tournament. And certainly, during stretches of that Notre Dame game, they did that. But this is a Northwestern team that has struggled this year, but was in the tournament last year, return almost that entire team. So this isn't a slouch team that Indiana did this against today. And so I think that's maybe one of the big takeaways from this game is we saw an NCAA tournament team in these Hoosiers. Now the question is, can they get enough wins to overcome some of the bad losses that they've had to build a resume that would warrant that type of discussion for real? And that we don't know. But I tell you what, I think I speak on behalf of all of us when I say we certainly feel better about it after these last 3 games than we did coming out of that Wisconsin game. And that's a real sign of progress. And I think this just leads to a very important and well-earned tip of the cap to Archie Miller after his 150th victory for what he has done rallying this team after the disappointment of that Wisconsin loss, where we're all kind of panicking. It kind of feels like one of those games, man, where's the season going to go from here? It looked like this team totally checked out in the second half. Have they quit on their coach? Yada, yada, blah, blah, blah. Then Deron Davis gets hurt. And now you're thinking, man, now we're really going to be up against it. And here Indiana's won 3 games against Big Ten opponents, one of them on the road, one of them by 20 points. And there's legitimate reason to feel good and to have some optimism. Good spot to be in.
Yeah, and I would agree. I mean, it just goes to show how unpredictable this team continues to be. I mean, at the time when things seem to be their lowest, turn around and you totally redeem yourself. Yeah, I don't really, it's been it's been strange, but I think it's good to see them be able, and you see them starting to gain some confidence, particularly on the defensive end, where they, trusting each other and knowing that if I play the pick and roll this way, somebody's going to rotate into the correct spot. And it's just such a big deal for them to start to build some of that confidence. I think they're starting to do it, and they're starting to see that, hey, look, if we can play defense this way, we're able to cover up some of our offensive deficiencies until things start to get going. And that was pretty much exactly what happened today. And that was, I think, for this team is what's going to have to be the blueprint. While Archie Miller has said, and we all hope this team is going to shoot the ball better than they have so far, the reality is they're more often than not haven't shot it well. But if they play defense the way they did today, they're going to be able to keep themselves in enough games that if they start to get hot, they put themselves in a position to make plays down the stretch. And I think, between the Minnesota game and the Penn State game, today obviously didn't come down to the stretch. We saw a team that executed a little bit better at the end of games than we did against Duke and Louisville in some of those games. So I think that's a positive as well, that they've got some confidence they can perform well in those situations.
Yep. All right. Coming up in our final segment of this edition of the Assembly Call, we hand out our game balls. We look ahead to Indiana's next opponent, Michigan State, on Friday. And then we deliver our final thoughts on Indiana's 66-46 victory over Northwestern in last call. That is next here on the Assembly Call. Stick with us. You are listening to the Assembly Call IU postgame show. I'm Jared Morris here with Andy Bottoms, wrapping up our breakdown of Indiana's 20-point victory over the Northwestern Wildcats at Simon Scott Assembly Hall today. Andy, it is time for game balls. A whole lot of guys to choose from today. Who gets your game ball?
I'm definitely going to go with Robert Johnson. Shocking to no one, but did hit 5 threes, led the team in scoring and rebounding. Had 3 assists. That was second behind Colin Hartman, as you mentioned. Just 2 turnovers. Got credited with a block shot here. I don't know that I remember that, but all right. So I thought he played really well. And then we talked about his defense on Scotty Lindsey. I thought he was a big factor in how poorly Lindsey shot the ball, and played 36 minutes. So played more minutes than anybody by a pretty wide margin. I mean, you had Newkirk played 30, and the next closest guy to that was Hartman, I think, with 22. So continue to play a lot of minutes and a lot on his shoulders. But I thought he played really well, and really. That stretch you mentioned, taking those 2 threes in succession there really showed some confidence that in the first half, those are the shots that he was passing up. And whether that was discussed with him at halftime or not, I don't really know, but he certainly, seemed to come out with more confidence and a guy that IU obviously needs to step up and shoot the ball well. And I thought it was a good bounce back for him after playing fairly poorly against Penn State.
Yeah, boy, you can make an argument for a lot of guys, and certainly Juwan Morgan with what he did and how important he was at the start of the second half could warrant mention here. But I agree with you. Robert would be my guy on a day when so many guys were in foul trouble in that first half, and you needed some upperclassmen to step up and keep you afloat and keep things going. Robert did that, and as you mentioned, led the team in scoring. I thought the timing of his 3-pointers were really big, and so he gets my game ball as well. And it's nice to see him, starting to be consistent. He's been, what's his line? Let me pull his line up here. From a scoring perspective, he scored 17 today. Obviously, he only had 10 against Penn State and didn't have a particularly good shooting night. Then had 28 against Minnesota, 14 against Wisconsin. He's now been in double figures in every game since that donut that he had against Louisville. And so I know that sometimes the efficiency hasn't been all that pretty. And exactly what you'd want, but he's also rebounding. He's had at least 5 rebounds in 3 straight games. He's had at least 2 assists in 3 straight games. And obviously he continues to play consistent defense. So on a team of guys that have been inconsistent, and certainly Robert has been too at times, there's no question about it. He is, at least from a production standpoint, for a guy who's playing that many minutes, able to produce while he's out there. And today was a really strong performance from him in a game when his team needed it. So nice job by Robert. All right, let's look ahead to Michigan State, Andy. This is a game I think that all of us have looked at all season as, okay, I think you termed it a throwaway actually on Assembly Call Radio, just because it's a game that you assume that you're going to lose. And I don't think anybody is now expecting that Indiana is going to go up there and beat Michigan State, the 5th-ranked team in KenPom. But it seems a little bit more likely than it did a week ago. Michigan State is coming off 2 performances, well, actually 3. If you go back to the Ohio State game, they got beaten by 16 at Ohio State, and they played 2 straight home games against Rutgers. They only won by 4, and Rutgers took them to overtime. That's the 121st ranked Rutgers Scarlet Knights. And then Michigan beat them by 10 in a game that really wasn't even competitive down the stretch. I mean, Michigan really had control of that game late, and Michigan State didn't even have a chance there the last 3 or 4 minutes to win that one. So, I don't know how well Indiana's going to match up against Michigan State. And on the one hand, you're encouraged by that loss against Michigan. And on the other hand, you're thinking, oh, great, they've had these 2 bad performances, and now Izzo's got them for a week. It's probably going to be hell for them. And they're just going to be so ready for this game and ready to come out and play. So you could kind of look at that either way. But I feel better about it than I did a week ago, because this Indiana team seems more confident, more competent, better chemistry together. They seem like they have a better idea of what they're out there trying to do, playing harder for longer stretches. And Michigan State seems to be reeling a bit. So I think, look, maybe we've got a chance to go up there and make it a competitive game. And if we hit a few shots, who knows?
Yeah, I mean, they really somehow they managed to get 3 Big Ten home games in a row, but whatever. They really have not played well. They got blown out in the Ohio State game, the Rutgers game, the Michigan game, as you said. And if you kind of look at their stats from a Big Ten play, if you're looking for areas of vulnerability, they're last in the league in forcing turnovers defensively, and they're 9th in the league in offensive turnover rate, and they turn the ball over at a really high rate against Michigan. I looked at it a second ago. I want to say it was 25%. So that continues to be an issue for them. And I think they're struggling a little bit with how they need to play. They have a ton of size, and yet somehow they're shooting almost 40% of their shots in Big Ten play from beyond the arc. And they're 8th in the league in 2-point field goal percentage, which seems unfathomable given Jaren Jackson, Nick Ward, Miles Bridges, the kind of size that they have. It doesn't really make any sense. Not only doesn't it make sense the shots that they're taking, but the fact they're not converting at a higher rate, even on the 2-pointers they do take. So, the big thing to watch out for IU is their free throw rate is at 45 in Big Ten play so far. So again, IU can't afford for a Juwan Morgan certainly to get into foul trouble, but really anybody. So they'll put some pressure on IU that way. I think it's a game though where we talked about this a little bit. I think on Assembly Call Radio with IU having to play smaller, it gives them a chance to really hopefully create some mismatches. And I think that was something that happened yesterday. Is Nick Ward was neutralized a little bit because he couldn't play against Wagner. It was a little bit like, what happened to Durham, quite honestly, in that game. Nick Ward only ends up playing 14 minutes and just really defensively ended up committing 4 fouls and just defensively struggled to, to hang with somebody a little bit more mobile. So whether he gets the assignment of Justin Smith or Juwan Morgan, you'd like to see IU take advantage of some of those things. So if you're looking for a matchup that might play in IU's favor, I think that would be a big one to look at initially.
Yeah, and obviously a couple of keys here, as it always is against Michigan State, you're going to have to rebound. This is the 5th best offensive rebounding team in the country. They get almost 38% of their missed shots. And it's obviously been a big key for Indiana holding their own on the defensive glass after that Wisconsin debacle in the second half. Indiana's done it against 3 straight opponents, but they're going up against a whole other level of rebounding team against Michigan State. And then you look at strength against strength, Indiana has really relied this year on its 2-point field goal percentage. For the Hoosiers are a team obviously not shooting well from 3-point range, but they've stayed afloat offensively because they're hitting almost 54% of their 2-pointers, which is 57th in the country. But Michigan State will enter this game on Friday as the number 1 team in terms of 2-point field goal defense. So they are holding opponents to just 35.5% on 2-point field goals, which is truly a remarkable number. Obviously, it hasn't been as good of late, but that shows you the kind of potential that they have. So Indiana's going to have to find some ways to score. Something that always seems to plague us at Michigan State are long stretches where we don't score. And they go on, a big run or two that kind of pushes the game out. And so we've really got to try and avoid that. And I think obviously if a guy like Robert Johnson can step up and make a 3 here and there, to prevent some of those runs, and if Juwan Morgan can stay on the floor and look, again, he only had 2 fouls today, so it's not like he hasn't really shown us that he has that ability. Those are some of the things that are going to have to happen. You get road wins against teams like Michigan State because your seniors step up and play really well, similar to what Robert and Juwan, guys like that did against Minnesota. So I guess I kind of just lumped Juwan in with the seniors now because he's been so consistent, although he's only a junior. But I think he's kind of earned that stature. But that's what's going to have to happen for Indiana to go up there, and then just hope that whatever message Tom Izzo is going to eventually instill that's going to turn Michigan State around doesn't happen until after Friday.
Yeah, and I mean, we talked about the bench a lot in this game. That's, Michigan, all 5 starters averaging double figures. Then they've got Matt McQuaid, who scores 6.5 points a game, and nobody else scores over 4. So they've got some role players that'll come in off the bench, but maybe another area where, IU could, be able to have a little bit of an advantage. And this really, while it would obviously be great to get the win, this is the first game in a little while, at least, where there wasn't a lot of pressure on IU. And, nobody at this point is expecting them to go in there and win. But I think if you look back at these last few games, I think there has, these last couple of home games in particular, a lot of pressure for, to kind of win these. They needed to build some momentum. I think the Minnesota game, there was a lot of pressure after how the Wisconsin game went. And I think that, this is a game you're kind of playing with house money. And so what do you really, just go in there and, don't be loose with the basketball, but just kind of play loose and play the way they did in the second half and see what happens. I think that's, a good thing for this team, a situation where you really don't have to overthink anything, because I think we've seen them do that over the course of the season so far. So one where it's like, look, nobody expects you to do anything. Play the nobody believes in us card, do whatever you got to do there and see what happens.
Absolutely. All right, you're listening to the Assembly Call IU postgame show. Remember that because you're an Assembly Call listener, you get 15% off your entire order at HoosierProud.com. So if you want officially licensed IU gear, one of our Assembly Call logo t-shirts, or one of Hoosier Proud's unique Indiana-inspired designs, visit HoosierProud.com and use the promo code ASSEMBLY at checkout. That's HoosierProud.com, promo code ASSEMBLY for 15% off your entire order. I'm Jared Morris. I'm here with Andy Bottoms. It is time for last call as we wrap up our breakdown of Indiana's 20-point win over Northwestern. Andy, your final statement on this Indiana victory.
Well, at the beginning of our show after the Wisconsin game, I kind of went on a mini rant about we know who this team is, and the team that quit and played that way was who this team was. Well, I apparently don't know what I'm talking about because the way they've played since then really is surprising on a number of levels, but it's exciting to see. And I think that's all that everybody wanted from a fan's perspective, to be able to see, hey, this is something building. We see what's going on. We see what the blueprint is. And while you're not seeing it all the time, you're seeing it in enough flashes, and it's are certainly the best 3 consecutive games that the team has played over the course of the season, like with no question whatsoever about that. And so, credit to these guys to really turn it around. And I think you can kind of see with the way they play today, they just continue to gain confidence as they go, as things start to work, I guess, for lack of a better term. So I think that's an exciting thing for them. And I think we'll have a confident team going into East Lansing. Whether they, can win that game or not, I don't know. But I think these guys can and should go into that game with some confidence because they've been playing really well, and it's exciting to see. So sometimes it's not great to be wrong, but in this case, I'm happy to be wrong that the team we saw at Wisconsin, maybe that team has gone away a little bit, or at least they've taken a vacation over these last few games, and exciting to see, these guys start to build on what's going on and see just the number of guys who are making contributions, as we've talked about so many times before, that, one guy has an off game, other guys step up. And we, at times earlier in the season, it was like, well, if this guy doesn't show up, like there's no chance of winning. I'm not sure that's the case anymore.
Yeah, whatever that ugly nonsense was in the second half against Wisconsin, it seems like we left it in Madison because these last 3 games they've each offered different reasons to be encouraged. And again, as I mentioned earlier, now here we sit, 4-2 in the conference, and we enter this game on Friday against Michigan State, a game like, Andy, that you termed a throwaway game, that certainly Michigan State's going to be favored and will probably win, by 10, 11 points. But I think all of us go into it feeling a little bit of hope. And that's a really good spot to be in here in mid-January. I think the overall trajectory of this season is really going about how any reasonable-minded Hoosier fan would have predicted it to go early in the season. The difference, of course, is that the lows have been really, really low. There have been some bad losses, and there maybe isn't, just the huge one, like Indiana didn't upset Duke or do something like that to offset it. But the steady progress overall, you're kind of seeing a program that's taken 2 steps forward and maybe a step or a half step back, and then another couple more steps forward. And that kind of progress is really important. It's really good to see. And you're seeing a team that has had a lot of bad habits that slowly but surely has started to discard some of those bad habits. The turnover numbers, haven't been as egregious. The defense is much better and more consistent. Obviously, if this team can get its outside shooting turned around at all and just become an average or even a good 3-point shooting team, that really ups what they're going to be capable of. But man, this was an impressive performance today against again, an opponent that made the NCAA tournament last year. And so I think a lot of reasons to go out of this weekend feeling positive. The team now gets, obviously this week, they'll have Monday and Tuesday and Wednesday and Thursday to really work and get prepared for this Michigan State game. And it's nice to see these Hoosiers have a game where really everybody contributed positively to the victory. It was Indiana's most complete performance of the season. In a lot of ways, Indiana's most encouraging performance of the season. And I'm just at the point now where I can't wait to see them play again. And coming out of that Wisconsin game, I don't think that's how anybody was feeling, but it's nice 3 games later to have that feeling be totally reversed. All right, that'll do it for us on this edition of the Assembly Call IU postgame show. Remember that our live broadcasts immediately following every IU game are always available on our homepage at assemblycall.com. and on our YouTube channel, youtube.com/assemblycall. And you can always catch up on demand anytime with our podcast. Just search for Assembly Call wherever you listen to podcasts. And don't forget to go to assemblycall.com/join to join our free email newsletter. Thank you for listening. We will talk to you again Thursday night for Assembly Call Radio. We will have a more expansive preview of that Michigan State game. And then, of course, we'll talk to you Friday night after IU Michigan State. Until then, keep your elbows in and your eyes on the rim, and go Hoosiers.